Very good morning to you. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. This is the second hour. In the room is Eric Latif and Ndu Okositi. Muga is away this week, but we have a guest who's joined us now, and his name is John Macharia. We'll introduce him shortly after reminding you today's proverb, which is a Maasai proverb. A proverb does not translate itself. Simple, not many stories. Oh, I don't know if you threw a proverb, you go there, you try and translate it, you will not be. No. A proverb does not translate itself.
You do.
Period.
Okay. Done. Correct.
That's it. All right? It's a Maasai proverb. One of the Maasais will call in and say it in Kimaasai.
Can I tell you something very quickly?
So you tell me.
About the Expressway. I think it's important. So there's a public notice from the Kenya National Highways Authority. Try to give that information through the traffic. However, important to note that last week there was a lot of suggestion. Can we have an additional wagon in with the train leaving that area going into the city? It would seem as though they've introduced an additional wagon effective today to offload travelers from the road, because the traffic on Mombasa Road has really been quite something. So the management has undertaken to secure all vehicles parked at the Syokimau train station as the vehicle owners transit to the train en route to the CBD. So an additional wagon has been added as from today. Traffic congestion will still be experienced, and those include areas currently under intervention as indicated below. Because of the erection of certain parts and excavation continuing on certain service lanes, expect additional traffic today on Mombasa Road, and that's outbound because the service lanes now have been shut off.
So the engineers are telling us there's going to be traffic.
Today. Yes. They're telling you today that it's going to happen today.
Because what's happening? So what are they doing?
Previously, you had the three lanes having been reduced to one, and that was inbound. Now, the service lanes are being excavated to help for the paving of the expressway. So now that is outbound, but it was an option for folks who were inbound and only had one lane. So now that option does not exist anymore. The solution that they've now given you is to offload traffic and you use the train to go to the CBD.
Okay. Have they given a good way to enter to the Syokimau train station?
No, it's guess and go. Where you find, you enter.
So if you're coming from the Syokimau side and you need to cross over to the other side to board the train, how do you go? Have they indicated, are there good directions being given? Is there a nice way that you can go? Oh, yes.
Sheer luck and the goodness of the Lord.
Vuka pandeile.
Yes. That's really what it is. You'll find your way.
Vuka pandeile.
You'll find your way.
And if you're a pedestrian, is there a place that they've demarcated? This is where pedestrians can walk and cross over from the Syokimau side and Gateway Mall side to the, if you want to go and board the train, because you've introduced a new. Sort yourself out. Engineering is a good.
Telling you,
engineering.
Wonderful. Engineering is, you say, you know what? Go in there, you figure it out and come out on the other side.
Wow.
If you end up alive, well and good. If you don't, well, c'est la vie.
The people who actually came up with engineering, if they woke up today and they found our engineers at Kenha, they'd be like,
I'm going back.
Good job, you guys. Good job. You really understood this discipline. Engineering is about creating problems and confusion. Very good. Not what we were taught about creating solutions. Engineering and solutions.
But what they've told you is to continue exercising caution and road courtesy while driving, as that has helped to manage traffic better. They are committed, however, to ensure a timely completion of the Nairobi Expressway and the delivery of the best quality services to customers and stakeholders at all times.
Very good. Very well said. Asanteni sana.
Right.
September 10th is 3 days away. What have they said they're going to do in September 10th?
September 10th, they would have a partial opening of the road from JKIA to Mlolongo, partial restoration, and by the 30th, it will be fully open.
Okay.
Let me stop there.
So we have a comedy show coming up on KTN, and this is partial opening of the JKIA Mlolongo section. This will be live. It will be televised. John Macharia. John Macharia is the country manager for the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. Asante sana for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest comedy show. Hey. Now, we're going to talk about food security. Okay? Let's forget about the roads.
Okay.
Let's talk about our stomach. Because if nothing else, at least let's eat. However, we're starting from a bad point because as we speak, how many? Close to 4-5 million Kenyans are facing starvation today. At any given time in this country, it's estimated about 2 million people are food insecure. They don't have access to clean, affordable, and
Sustainable
safe food.
sources of food.
Now, what does that say about our country?
Thank you, Eric. I think in terms of numbers, I think the number of people who are going through acute hunger are actually about 3.6 million. And we must take that problem in context because it's a symptom of certain issues that are happening within an ecosystem or within a food system. And the first thing to talk about and to remember is that Kenyans, as much as you're saying it's a comedy show, we grow at a rate of about 1 million people a year.
Yep.
So by 2030, we'll possibly have 10 million more people that we need to be feeding. And in the same context, our food production has not necessarily caught up with the rest of the world. So if you think about maize, I think on average our national production is about 1.5 metric tons per hectare, vis-a-vis countries that are producing 5 to 8 to 10 metric tons per hectare. The other important thing to note is that this decade, the biggest conversation also in this decade is about climate change. And Kenya as a country has not been spared from the vagaries of climate change. So we have increased weather variability. So we are seeing increased floods, we are seeing increased droughts. But we've also seen increases in pests and diseases. The whole of last year, beyond having COVID, we actually had to battle a locust invasion that actually was in about 27 counties in this country. The other important thing is to think about the relationship with our environment. We are seeing increased acidification of our soils. And also just to note that we're also seeing that more people are converting farmland into real estate. You know, and there's a very ripple effect in terms of food security. Some time back, a group that I was in purchased about 80 acres of land. And we then asked the question, what's the cost? How many plates have we taken off the table?
Yep.
And at the time, by buying 80 acres of land, we were looking at maybe 300 people will not be able to have maize again on the table. And the last thing to think about is about the interconnected nature of agriculture. To produce food, you need to have land, you need to have a good environment, but you also need to have good trade policy. You need to have access to finance. You need to make sure that farm organizations are actually working for the women and youth. So there's a question about inclusivity. And in that regard, we then need to think about how we build back better, but build more resiliently and inclusive food systems that are not only providing, food for all of us, but are also environmentally sustainable, but are also providing, jobs and incomes for our women and our youth.
You've used some two buzzwords there, build back better, and then there's food systems. Now we've heard of the build back better. What are food systems?
So the food systems conversation, it's not necessarily a new thing. It's just a new way of thinking. So if you think about Kenya and you think about the 7 things I've just mentioned, the question is, how are we working together with all these things that are working in parallel so that at the end of the day, they're all working together for a farmer? Right? When I was just coming in, we were talking about, sometimes you have traction in one truck, then you have reversals in another truck. A couple of years ago, you remember the conversation about the warehouse receipting systems.
Yep.
And at the time, AGRA was actually piloting that particular system together with a number of banks and a couple of millers. But in the same year, we had the interest rate caps. So whereas you could actually lend out at maybe 13-14% for a load of cargo, when the rate caps were brought in, the first thing we saw is that there was a reduction in the amount of credit that was made available to agriculture, not just to the SMEs, agribusinesses, but also to farmers. But that meant that, the agricultural sector was being starved of cash. And a lot of that cash, if you remember, went into real estate. And we then saw a boom across the country where you had all these flats were, being made available for sale. Now, let me also give you another interesting statistic, Latif. This country produces about 38 million bags of maize. But we consume annually, right? But we consume about 52 million bags of maize. But the scientists tell us that our post-harvest losses are at about 30% of the 38 million bags that you have produced. So ballpark figure, 10 million bags actually do not get to the market. But then we have 3 to 5 to 6 million people who are going hungry. And if you do your math, actually what we are losing could actually go to feed the people that we are talking about.
Yep.
Right? So, and that's an existential problem that we've seen that needs to be readdressed.
Why can I jump in there, John? Why is that much being lost? It's a lot. It's a lot. Why is it being lost? And then other efforts are being made, and what efforts can actually be made to mitigate that particular issue?
So there are plenty of efforts being made, and I think there's a need to reevaluate the statistics we have. And I believe the situation is better, but it's speaking about the value chain investments you put into place. And one of the things about agribusiness, when you set up a processing facility, you're actually putting together a business that is going to convert something from raw material into a commodity that lasts longer.
Yep.
If you think about a banana, within 30 days, it comes from being green, to yellow, to being something else. Now, what you need to have is a cold chain that will actually extend the shelf life of that particular banana. If you think about the horticulture value chain, I think the loss levels are almost at 40%. But it's because of how many cold chains do you actually have, or how many pack houses? And that's why you need to allow the efforts of the likes of Professor Kivuda Kibwana, who have actually put together a pack house that is able to make puree, is able to actually store much better.
Right.
And those kinds of things make life better. The other important thing is for Kenyans to understand and farmers to understand is that we need to have better relationship with our soils, with our water, and with our environment. For the longest time, the fertilizer that was made available was a standard one, right?
Yeah.
Which then meant that you're mining certain nutrients from the soil without necessarily replacing them or without necessarily asking the question, is this fertilizer the best for this crop, right? So what we are trying to encourage within the food systems conversation is that we need to have crop-specific but agroecology-specific fertilizers, because the ecosystem in Nyanza is not the same one at the coast. But then you also need to have nutrient-efficient seed varieties. And what that means is that you need a variety that is going to consume less water, but give you a much higher yield. That way you're building, a resilient food system. And it's also to talk about the question, on the front end, you're thinking about nutrition. And because of nutrition, people are gymming more. And then you're now talking about portions. But at the far end, the farmer is saying, give them more food.
Yep.
And on the front end, people are saying, I need to start eat less.
Yeah.
So what does eat less mean? It means that we need to have, eat less for nutritional purposes, but diversify your diet. Instead of maize, do millet. Take more vegetables. And that then also reduces strain on certain value chains. And if I might quote Piers Borger, you depoliticize one value chain, which is
the maize one.
Which is the maize one.
But there's a question you still haven't answered, John, which is this 30% post-harvest losses for maize. What causes that? That's a very, very huge percentage.
So let's put it like this. The loss, post-harvest loss in maize, and not just in maize, I believe, I think it's also in the pulses value chain. It's not in one particular area. It's actually across the chain. So if you think about a farmer and their drying practices, certainly you'll see some level of loss there. If you think about transportation and you're transporting in gunny bags, there's certainly a level of loss that is coming in there. Then if you think about the milling process, there's loss coming in there. But it's also important to realize the amount of loss that is occasioned by aflatoxins. Remember, for a while, we used to procure maize from smallholder farmers. We put it in silos in Nairobi or in other areas, and we bought it at above market rate. Then 6 months later, someone comes and says 50% of this maize in this particular store is not fit for human consumption.
Yeah.
That is some serious amount of loss, right? And it's really about the practices and the efficiencies we want to drive within the maize value chain or within the pulse value chains. The absence of those inefficiencies are what are actually creating this amount of loss. And like I said, at some point we need to reevaluate the data to actually know if you're making significant changes, because there has been a growing number of mills in the country, which certainly means that more is being taken from the farmer, is being taken from the value chain, and is being processed for human consumption. And the ministry has also done well in passing the, blended flour bill, which then means that within your packet of ugali, you should be able to have some millet in there. And I think right now, if you go to the supermarket, there's loads of fortification. And that begins to stem the issues of post-harvest losses. Yeah.
I mean, I'm hearing all these things that we're talking about, and we're saying, okay, these are interventions that can, hold here and there. But what seems to bother me is that when I hear about famine in certain parts of the country, which we already know because of geographical patterns, we know that it's going to happen. There's really nothing you can do about that. However, I do think that there are things that can be done to mitigate those. So are we looking at, water harvesting? Are we looking at things that we can do when there is a bumper harvest so that we can now have this food spread? The food that is being produced in the country, is it all being consumed? Is there nothing in storage? Is there nothing that can even be exported? Are we currently consuming everything that is being produced? And if so, what are some things that can be done to make sure now that we're talking about storage for tomorrow? Are we looking at when there's a bumper harvest, are we desiccating our grain? Are we drying out our milk and things like that? Or the other day there was a milk glut and we're pouring away milk. What are some interventions that we can put in place to make sure that there is storage happening so that we are not in this 3.6 million debacle that we are in currently?
So, and that's a fantastic question in a number of ways. One, climate change is there. You will have droughts, you will have floods. And that's why I said we need to have a better relationship with our water, because crops need water, they don't need rain, right? And the question is, can we store that water better? For a while, we worked with the ministry, and the ministry was actually setting up water pans as opposed to water dams. Because when you invest in a 1 million cubic dam, it will probably serve 30,000 homes. But if each and every one of those homes had a water pan, you'd actually have that water within a homestead ready for use in agriculture. And these are things we've seen the ministry try and do, and they're actually very good initiatives. As an institution, we're actually working with SNV on a project to educate smallholder farmers and livestock keepers in Isiolo, Laikipia, and Samburu around what we call the food security and water nexus. And that is, can we first of all help you get good agronomic practices on how to better utilize the water that is even available, right? So that you can actually plant, or you can have your livestock, have a longer longevity, and then they're actually able to take you throughout the season. The ministry has also launched what is called the Agricultural Sector Growth and Transformation Strategy. And within it, there are quite a number of flagships that are aimed at not only driving up, agri-businesses in the country, but also trying to fix out the issues of, maize procurement in this country, fertilizer procurement in this country, having better research facilities, monitoring and evaluation in this country, but also talking about the question of extension. Because in Kenya, the work of the extension has actually been decentralized to the county governments. So you need to also engage with the county governments to try and ensure that extension officers are available to try to have what you'd want to call knowledge transfer to smallholder farmers. And there are good examples, for example, with Governor Nyoro, who during the COVID period, was able to engage almost 1,000 volunteers to be able to deliver maize varieties and some form of training to smallholder farmers. We are seeing the same kind of examples coming from Governor Wairia in Muranga, as well as Kivutha Kibwana in Makueni. And all these are being done in a way that aim to drive food and nutrition security as per the president's Big Four aspirations.
Sometimes when I look at the agricultural sector, starting just from the government, we all seem to know what needs to happen. Everybody, start from very well-informed principal secretaries to the directors of the various departments, to then the institutions there. We have the Kenya Agriculture and Livestock Research Organization. People who work for CalRO are people who walk to any conference in this world and people stand up for them because they know that these people understand their stuff. People who work in the livestock sector as well, same. When it comes to implementation in the country, there seems to be, we are doing things in a disjointed manner. For example, like the example you've just given, Governor Nyoro doing this in Kiambu, Governor Kivuta Kibwana doing this in Makueni, Mwangi Wairia doing this in Muranga. Nyoro is the chairman of the Agriculture Committee in the Council of Governors. Would we say that, this is a conversation that's being driven at the Council of Governor level, where they are actually tapping on the knowledge, for example, of what Nyoro has in the agriculture and food security sector to drive implementation of policy at that level? Would we say that even as we see CS Munya rolling out the transformation strategy at national level, is it being understood by the implementers? Where are the gaps?
Certainly, Eric. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. For a couple of years now, we've undertaken governance studies in a number of countries. And the best-in-class countries that are managing their agricultural ecosystems are the ones that actually understand the number of things that are happening parallelly, but need to happen together and are speaking together. Right? And in this country, in Kenya, for example, one of the things we have been, trying to push for is, what is called the Joint Agriculture Secretariat to be strengthened, because that is a coordination mechanism that creates an avenue for the national government and the county government to seriously and seamlessly talk about, agriculture. But at the county level, and I do agree with you, Eric, I think Governor Nyoro has done a pilot that has done well, but now needs to be replicated in all the 47 county governments. And one of the things we've been in discussion with him is a very simple concept. If every county was able to allocate 50 million shillings to go into extension and to go into, serious training of smallholder farmers, and you have 47 of them, you're looking at in excess of 2 billion shillings every year going into agriculture and going into a very critical nerve that is required to make sure that agriculture works. But you have to have pilots that actually begin to show all the 47 governors that this works, right? And once that begins to work, then you then have, an uptake, an adoption rate that, we are really praying, because next year is an election year, that that momentum does not get affected, even as, people transition in and out of government.
It's an interesting conversation that we're having this morning with John Macharia. He's the country manager at AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. How do we transform Kenya's food systems? And that's the conversation we are having. And we're glad there are people who are already enjoying the conversation. Pamela Rita Munyi says, timely conversation on agribusiness. Kenya's biggest conversation continues. In the room this morning is Eric Latif and Ndu Oko. CT Muga is away. We have a guest, John Macharia. He is the country manager for AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. We are talking about Kenya's food systems and what needs to happen to see them transformed. John, you were discussing and even trying to define the food systems. You talked about the various parts of it. There's the financial side, there's the input side. Looking at the fertilizers and the seeds. There's understanding the soil, and that's the research side. Then there's the markets. All those things you're saying need to work in tandem and very well. But then are we talking about the various players understanding what each player is doing, or do the various players just need to focus on being very good at what they do?
So all those things, again, need to work in tandem, but I think they all come together at policy level. So in Kenya, what we've seen working with the ministry is that the ministry has actually set up what is called the Agricultural Transformation Office. And that's an office that is actually monitoring the work that is being done under the Agricultural Growth and Transformation Strategy. But it's also coordinating mechanism that is also working with the county governments to make sure that things are being tracked and things are being done. But what needs to be strengthened is how we bring out what the counties are actually doing, and we front load that in all our national documents and things like that. But coordination is something that we are seeing improving, and we are hoping that even as we drive this transformation in the country, that we should begin to see tangible results at the farmer level, and with our hunger index and things like that.
So how then, because what we're seeing right now, I'm still going towards this collective agriculture in the country that could essentially make sure. Okay, so before I even go to that, very simple question: is Kenya food secure? Not are we getting towards food security? Are we putting together things right now that would eventually lead to food security? Are we secure right now, today?
The Ministry of Agriculture has what is called the Food Security Monitoring Committee, and as far as their last report indicates, Kenya is food secure. We have a live food balance sheet that actually tracks the amount of maize, beans, rice, and other commodities on a weekly and bi-weekly basis to make sure that, we are food secure. And why that tracking is important is because if we begin to have deficits, then that drives up consumer prices at the front, but at the back end, you're actually having smallholder farmers that might be producing in an environment where the best decision is actually to allow for certain imports to come through. Number two, out of that kind of information, you're also tracking the amount of acreage in the country that has been planted for commodity 1, 2, and 3. And with that, you're then able to predict that by the time harvest comes, we should be able to have this amount of production or this amount of food available for the country. But the other thing to say is this, and I think the ministry has said this time again, the country is also food secure because the 12 million bag deficit that we have is actually fed from Tanzania, from Uganda. So having better trade policies also helps our own food security situation and position.
I see it differently, though, John. I have read the National Food and Nutrition Security Policy, and the definition of food security is not about availability, it's about access.
Yes.
The things that we've been talking about, those are availability. So do we have maize available? Yes. Do we have grain available in the country? Yes. Are we producing enough? Yes. Are we able to meet the shortfall by bringing in from the neighboring countries? Yes. However, is it accessible? And I think if we now went into that grain, whether that food is accessible as the definition should be, that is accessible easily and more affordably, I think then we'll have questions to answer.
And you're absolutely right. That is a classical definition of food security. And I think what you're alluding to is an issue of the cost of food. And one of the interesting things, if you remember, I think last year or the year before, there was a very healthy conversation on what is the effective price of a pack of maize in Nairobi. If you're going into the slums, and vis-a-vis what is the best price to give a farmer in the village, right? And I think one of the things that has been commonly said is that a pack of maize in Nairobi should not go beyond 100. Otherwise, your consumer price index begins to go out of the roof. But at the same time, at the back end, you have cost of production issues that you need to be able to deal with. So part of the solution is, on the one hand, providing subsidies to smallholder farmers so that the cost of production comes down. If the cost of production comes down, then the farmer is able to make a certain amount of income that allows for food at the consumption level to be at a certain price, which then makes sure that people are not having, riots on the street because of food riots like we saw a couple of years back. So I believe solutions are there. They're being done to make sure that you not only have availability, but you have access, but it is also being done at a cost that is affordable to the common mwananchi in Kenya in general.
They say that, if you cut your foot, you're not able to walk properly. That affects your whole being. So now if we're looking at food security for this entire country, and there's a section of the people, there's a section of the country that is not able to access food at any given time, then it affects the entire grid. It affects the entire body of whether you can be secure or not. So for me, from where I'm looking at it, if you have 3.6 million people at any given time who are not able to access this food, then the country is not secure. In terms of food, are there sustainable resources available to make sure that at any given time, we will not see the pictures that we are seeing. We will not hear the cries that we are seeing. We will not see this issue where people are looking for water and the water they get is dirty water at best. So for me, that security involves and includes sustainable sources, making sure that your sustainability is high up there in the percentages. We cannot say that collectively the country is food secure if you have even the slightest percentage of people who are looking for food and their resources have been depleted.
And we're talking about safe food.
Absolutely. And I do agree with you, but different problems also have different solutions. And I think the way that particular solution of people who are really in an acute situation, I think the solution has actually been to give them cash stipends, right? Because if you think about it, if I say that because we're having a glut in Kiambu, now I should take my cabbages to Turkana. The question is there infrastructure in Turkana to make sure that my cabbages are able to stay for a week or two and be able to feed people there, right? But if you give people cash stipends, you're then able to begin to attract private sector who can actually begin to put together that infrastructure. And that conversation with the county is even more critical because the county does have money from our coffers, from our taxes, to begin to put up that investment. And in that sense, you're quickly putting up value chain infrastructure that makes the food that is available to stay longer and to feed people more.
Yeah.
So the question is, what's the solution? What's the short-term solution? What's the mid-term? And what's the long-term solution? And one of the important things to also remember is that we have a national climate change action plan. And counties are beginning to domesticate that action plan so that you're having infrastructure solutions towards issues to do with food, but you're also having smallholder farmers begin to adopt climate-smart technologies and approaches that ensure, first of all, they're able to produce within the ecosystems they're in. And that is then also helping, attract private sector because now so you can order different things than you used to order before. Yeah.
I think maybe we could say that there could be a certain threshold. If you get to 80%, then you can declare yourself food secure, but you cannot ignore the 20%. I don't think really that we should be saying that Kenya is 100% food secure when we know that there are people who cannot access that food, safe food, and also they cannot access nutritious food. Because much as we want to do the cash transfer to an area that has not produced any crop, cash transfer to an area where animals are dying because of lack of water and lack of fodder, cash transfer to that area, we are simply saying that those people are going to be able to go and buy a kilo of meat and they'll not be able to get vegetables. They'll not be able to get the carbohydrates that they need. So are those people really food secure if it's not nutritious?
So and that's a good question, Eric. But the way this works is that you have to have a global index, right? And for example, if you remember, I think this year or late last year, we had the global index, a global hunger index for the whole world. Kenya had actually improved. Kenya was actually doing relatively well at a national level. The question is, how do we take this index and take it at a county level? Because certainly Nairobi will not be the same as Turkana. Mombasa will not be the same as Kisumu. So how do we take that global metric, take it to the county level so that these variabilities, people begin to become clear about them. And that then drives the level of investment that is required within that particular ecosystem. For example, the example I gave about Governor of Kiambu, he had actually isolated 1 or 2 wards where there was, people are being given food aid, and he was asking what's the problem there, right? But because he has this level of research or this level of metrics talking about food security, he's then able to better isolate an area and what investment is required. And that is at a county level. So the question is, the 3.6 million vulnerable homesteads, they're in which counties? And how do we help the county governments to then have sight of that information and recommend what investments need to be made, right? But part of that conversation is both at the national and county level, we need to increase the budgetary allocation to agriculture. I think CADAP recommends 10%. We have seen a lot of variation over the years. At the county level, we're also seeing a lot of variation. If you think about Kivuda Kibwana, Governor Nyoro will probably be at the higher tier. If you think about other counties, things are different. But certainly we need to increase investments in agriculture, especially to the regions where we are having vulnerable homesteads. Yeah.
Do you think that it's something that should be national policy? Because right now, what it would appear is that it's a suggestion. All right, for those who are, geographically disadvantaged, because that's what it is. Every year you will have this, where you have little to no rainfall. You will then not be able to have these sustainable resources that you're talking about. Do you think that it ought to be national policy? Because we've seen it happen in other countries, where you have areas in the world, Australia, Israel, parts of the United States, where there is natural desertification, it becomes national policy that a part of your budget then must go towards making sure that you set aside money to make sure that in the time of rainfall, this and that happens, that your development budget goes towards damming and things like that. Do you think it will help in this country that some of these things in these areas, out of the 23 counties, for example, we see these problems, 12 of those are in dire circumstances and continue to be the subjects of this over and over? National policy then would advise that, almost under law, that you do something with your funds to sort out this problem. Would that help?
So the first thing to remember is that the Kenyan Constitution, the 2010 Constitution, is quite clear that agriculture is devolved. And it is at an implementation and a financial level. So that has already been set. But what we are seeing, not just in Kenya and in all other countries, it's good to have policy, but it's better to have policies that are being implemented. And policy implementation is basically making cash available, right? That then makes the investments that are required to drive the change that we require. And that is why even when we talk about CADAP, the 10% requirement is exactly what we keep telling all the counties, that please get it to this level. It's not necessarily saying that 10% is sufficient, but it's a good and great start, to get us significantly moving the needle, not just for the high potential areas, but also the areas that, are actually having, resource constraints around climate change and things like that. Yeah.
The many
So
players,
policy implementation with adequate funds is what is important.
That's very critical.
Yeah.
Is there political goodwill really to get all these things rolling? I'm asking that on the back of a statement, for example, that was released on the 30th of August by the Association of Kenya Animal Feeds Manufacturers, AGFEMA. And they're already raising the red flag and saying, look, we are the ones who produce animal feeds and we use crop products to produce animal feeds. Now, what are they saying? Kenya does not produce any reasonable quantities of soybeans, sunflower or cotton, whose byproducts, that's soybean meal, sunflower seed cake, cotton seed cake, are major sources of protein in the manufacture of animal feeds. Kenya depends entirely on imports from Tanzania, Uganda, Malawi and Zambia for oil cakes. Now, how many acreages in this country are under livestock production? It's a bigger percentage of Kenya that's actually under livestock production. How many acreages are under crop production? And of those, if we're actually not even producing enough, it talks about something. We have an issue with feeding the people with plant. We have an issue with feeding the people with protein, animal protein. It's an issue. So I was saying, is there political goodwill across the board from the national level on implementation, not just on producing good papers? This is a strategy. What is it called? This one, the agriculture sector transformation strategy, the food and nutrition policy. All these things are there on paper. Is there goodwill to see them being implemented? And that is coming to that point of putting the money where all these documents are.
I believe there's goodwill, and for me, goodwill first of all comes from the presidency, in that he has a big four and actually has a pillar on agriculture, and has called himself out to, an aspiration to have 100% food and nutrition security for all Kenyans. That's number one. One of the points I talked about why our food system is failing is because of the level of yields and productivity that we have. We are producing 1.5 metric tons of maize in a hectare, where others are doing 5, or 6 or 10 or 9. So certainly our cost of production and the efficiencies we can push to the AGRA group for them to be able to provide animal food at affordable prices is certainly affected. I know there's a very controversial subject about, genetically modified sources and things like that. But I think the ministry has made an attempt to actually try and introduce that for cotton in the country, because that then speaks to the question of cotton seed cake, right? So I believe there are attempts that are being made, but they need to be coordinated in a sense that they actually are tangible and live, for example, to the group of the members of ACAFEMA. But I think political will is there, and I think there are quite a number of interventions being made to ensure that not only the crop side of things, but also people who are livestock keepers, and I believe even fisher folk, there are quite a number of interventions being made to ensure that there's access, availability, and resources at an affordable cost.
You mentioned fisherfolk, and I think that's very interesting because we've talked about, what's going on at the newly established Lamu port, what has been happening in Kisumu for the longest time, what interventions are being put in place, because one of the issues that we see obviously is storage. So you have your fresh catch, and then if you don't sell it, it goes to waste because there's not adequate storage. We're looking at freezer containers and things like that. Other interventions that we keep talking about that are vital to make sure that these things actually work. Just as an example of that. So in all of these things that are happening, where does AGRA come in? Because we know why AGRA was established in the first place, to look at this transformation, to look at the transformative design then of going to from where you have nothing to then now when you're dealing with the smaller organizations to add up to the big picture. In all of this, where does AGRA come in to make sure, or to at least help and support, to make sure that these things are being realized?
Number one, AGRA is an alliance. So we bring people together to have a conversation. Right now, today is the first day of the AGRF, Africa Green Revolution Forum. And in this particular conference, we expect more than 10,000 people to have a conversation on food systems and Africa's agricultural transformation journey. Part of the participants are sitting and former heads of state. We have ministers of agriculture, we have farmers, we have women, we have finance partners. We have all value chain players coming to have this conversation. The second thing is that in our DNA, we work with government. We work with government as a partner. We work with government as an advisor, right? So that we are able to provide the evidence that is required to ensure that the right decisions are being made, right? And the third thing is that we come out as a technology, how do I call it? We buy down the risk for you to do certain things. So we will invest in pilots together with governments. We will invest in pilots together with private sector so that we are able to show or prove a case about what certain good technologies or practices can actually be able to bring to the table. So quite recently, like you talked about fisheries, we've done a study that will possibly be put available in a couple of weeks around aquaculture. And we found that the issues of aquaculture have to do with the size of the pond and the number of fish you can actually put within a pond, fingerlings you can have within a pond, a pond. But the biggest issue, again, to ACAFEMA, it's the cost of animal feeds. Because we are seeing that the getting some ingredients from the Black Sea is actually cheaper than buying the same ingredients from sources in Kenya.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, but it's true. But the evidence is out there, and I believe that will be used to make the right choices in terms of, making raw material accessible, making value chain investments to make sure that we are able to store much better.
There's a comment from Joe's Fresh Farm. I think he's posted 3 comments. If you just scroll down a bit, Ndu. Starting with this one, I welcome diversification of food varieties across different countries. Our counties, erosion of genetic pools of underutilized or minor crop species like indigenous leafy vegetables, small-grained African cereals, legumes, wild fruits, and tree crops are disappearing in the face of competition with industrially produced varieties of wheat, maize, rice. What's he talking about?
And that's actually a very good point. As you think about food systems, the question is, of course, we are producing, but the other extreme, we are having malnutrition and obesity, right? And the push then is for how do we have healthier lifestyles? How do we have, agricultural systems that are actually pushing towards better health? And one of the issues has been, we are carb-heavy community. But what are the healthier sources of carbs? Millet, African leafy vegetables. We run a sustainable land management program in Western Kenya, and we've actually seen that the African leafy vegetable is actually ending up as a value chain for women, but it is actually providing more household income than the traditional value chains you think about maize and beans. But having more African leafy vegetables on the table also means that the community is healthier.
Yeah.
You're eating healthier diets, right? If you're going to work with millet growers and you have the flour blending policy, it means that you're actually taking up healthier food. So I totally agree with him that the whole idea of diversification is good, not just from a production standpoint, but also from a consumption standpoint.
So I think he goes ahead to say now food and farming systems can be reformed, but only by moving away from an industrial orientation and organization.
When I think about anything, especially agriculture, I think about the planet, I think about people, and I think about profit. I'll start with profit. It's because of sustainability. There's no investor who's going to come into something that is not making money. I think about people, and I think about inclusivity, because different communities have different diets. They have different approaches to viewing food, right? So that is vitally important. And there are communities who will want to eat what is organic. There are others who will want to eat what is industrial consumed because of money, right? And the last thing is about the environment. We must think about it sustainably, because it's the one resource that is bound to make sure that we're able to produce food not only now but into the future, right? So it's about the different communities and people. If you go to Kisumu, what is the indigenous fish that you'll find there that we can talk about? Right?
I actually don't know.
You don't know, right?
Tilapia and Nile perch are not indigenous, are they?
I don't even know.
Very interesting. Right now, I mean, just quickly, it's that, right now, a lot of people, even if we're looking at smallholder farmers, they're not going into farming to contribute to the national cake. Most farmers are going into farming for personal business. So when we start talking about things like this, that are we now looking at alternate resources of food? Is it something that now farmers will then be able to imbibe, realizing that we're looking at this as a national thing as opposed to my business and how I can make money for myself?
I think the bigger question is what type of farmer do you see 10 years out in 2030? The national statistic we have right now is that the average age of a farmer is anywhere between 65, 75 years old. 10 years from now, do you expect that person to be the farmer who is producing for this country? Whereas our recent statistics indicate that the average age of Kenya is 20 to 22 years old. So how do we get that young man or woman interested in agriculture as an opportunity? How do we put productive assets into their hands? How do we ensure someone living out of campus can get land, can get finance, can get skills that allow them to make profit, to find a job and an income out of agriculture? And I always give this example.
Can you come again one day so we can actually talk about that? About ensuring that young people can see agriculture as not just as this thing that's punishment because you got a D,
Yes.
but as a way of life.
Absolutely. It is a way of life.
John Macharia, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
John is the country manager at the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. We've been talking about transforming Kenya's food systems. Thank you very much, George. Have you again in the studio. John, sorry. Have you again in the studio soon.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.